The People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, presents Nation Watch.
The Prime Minister ended on a note that is very apt to him. No one can pour truth in your brain. You have to find it yourself. Let me remind you that when the PNC left government in 1992, there was money in the budget to build the Soesdijk-Linden Highway, which the PPP government took away and used in other places. That is a truth. Mr. Speaker, I do not know if the word joker is unparliamentary. Could you tell me so I don't use it as a means of description of the PM? I could?
A joke is well taken, and I have made quite a few in the house.
Okay.
A joke.
Yes, Mr.
But
Speaker.
calling people jokers is like...
Well, it must have been a joke for the Prime Minister to sit there and say that you built a COVID-19 hospital and you didn't invite people. Who will tour at a time of COVID hospital? It's just open. Mr. Speaker, it makes absolutely no sense. The government might have allowed you to tour if it was the PPP because they won't get rid of you. Mr. Speaker, I had to shift from my text to deal with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, affiliation to Linden. It is only when he became Prime Minister you began to return to Linden. And that is a fact. I have been in contact and in Linden continuously. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spoke about us not having a national youth conference and council. We did, right in this building. And emerging from it after consultation was a youth policy that still exists while your government has none. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe the script that you would have given turned out to be an embarrassment for you. Who, Mr. Speaker, will come here knowing that in under 5 years, the APNU AFC increased workers' wages by more than 70% and make the kind of statement you would have made? Mr. Speaker, it is one thing to come here, Mr. Prime Minister, and tell us about the gas to shore energy plan and the money. But you can't tell us until now, how much it will cost and what will be the cost for the electricity for the consumer. If you fail to do that, then you are wasting our time. There is much more I wanted to say, but the Prime Minister, in the face of fact, ran. I don't like talking behind people's back, and so I will reserve it for when I catch him again. Mr. Speaker, I move away from the protocols to deal with the Prime Minister, but I want to say a special thank you to all the members of Parliament in the opposition side. They have critiqued this budget in a way that the people of Guyana have long concluded that this budget does not cater for them. Mr. Speaker, I believe as well that we have done exceptionally well, because when the Honorable Vince Roy Jordan spoke about what happened in Region 5, the government went and had them giddy up. And so they worked from Wednesday after the budget until now, rectifying the problems. The people of Region 5 asked me to say thanks to the member of parliament who raised it, and for the first time, some responsiveness from the government. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, as the Prime Minister
Hello and welcome to today's edition of Nation Watch, the first program for 2023. I take this opportunity to wish all Guyanese the best of everything for the year 2023 and hope that we can make this a prosperous year. Today we're going to be discussing Budget 2023, and my guest is the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Aubrey Norton, and we will take a preliminary look at Budget 2023. The debate is scheduled to begin tomorrow. Welcome, Mr. Norton.
Thanks for having me. And may I take this opportunity to say Happy New Year to all the listeners and viewers of this program.
Budget 2023, heavy on money, very, very light on benefits for the Guyanese population, the working population, the working poor of this cooperative republic. There is not much for the. What's your comment on that, sir?
Well, first, the first thing I want to say is this. Budget 2023 does not fit the reality of Guyana. If one is to produce a budget that fits the reality of Guyana, there are a number of things that would have been addressed in it. One of them would be the high cost of living. There is no attempt in the budget to deal with the high cost of living. And even though the government said it would have set aside $5 billion to cushion the cost of living, you're aware that it is the same amount they set aside last year. And the budget, notwithstanding setting aside that last year, people continue to rise, and really there was no relief. Now, if one takes that in the context of the 2023 budget being an increase by 41%, one would have thought a logical sequel of that was that there would be increases in terms of the actual resources that are being put into the hands of the people. What in essence you have is a large amount of this money is going to infrastructure. Now, don't miss me, Guyana needs infrastructure. But you can't just throw money at projects while to give your friends, family, favorites contracts. You need, first of all, a very structured approach to infrastructure development. There seems to be no such approach. What one sees is a mechanism for squandermania, for people to be able to get rich at the expense of the people of Guyana. For instance, let's look at if the government had any intention of helping the small man. One of the very things that could have been done was to not raise the threshold by $10,000. You raise the threshold by $10,000, you haven't given significant relief to people. If, however, you had said, for instance, anybody under $150,000 wouldn't pay taxes, that would have been a direct benefit. And then you wouldn't have to deal with the threshold because that would put the threshold at 150,000. The government seems not interested in putting resources in the hands of the people. So a measure like that, they have avoided. They have given $10,000. Then when it comes to public assistance, you give an increase of $2,000. Now, $2,000 will be deposit. Some people will pay to get the money. Pensioners will pay to go and get their money. And so there is no concerted effort to help the people. I want to go back to infrastructure.
But before you go to
Yeah.
infrastructure, let us address this question of the threshold just a little bit more. Now, the minimum wage has moved to $80,892 per month. The income tax threshold has moved to $85,000. It is reported that the minister with responsibility for finance has said that this move to have the income tax threshold shifted to 85,000 will take 12,000 persons.
Which is untrue.
This is what he's reported to have said, that it will remove 12,000 persons from the role of paying tax, PAYE. This in itself tells you if a $10,000 shift is going to remove 12,000 persons from the tax-paying role, that the wages in this country are ridiculously low, even in the face of significant oil revenues and all these mammoth infrastructure programs that we're talking about.
It is true that the wages and salaries are extremely low. But for me, the issue is not the removal of 12,000 persons. For me, it's the question of real income. When you do that, you have not contributed significantly to improving the income of people. And that is why I say, if you're moving to 80,000, let's put it at 81 to give that. It means that these people you carry to 85, now that you carry to 85, they wouldn't be paying taxes, 12,000. But what happened with those 80,000 to 150,000 who really and truly are also fighting to make ends meet? They now have got to pay income tax on the so-called increase. And that is why I'm saying we need to advocate for $150,000 and below not paying taxes. Then and only then can you begin to significantly impact. And that has to be done with measures to ensure that you curb inflation. Because if you do it in the way the government is doing it, you're going to put money in the system, like I've argued, but you will not increase production and productivity. And therefore, it will increase the cost of living and you'll be back to square one.
But there's also a very, very simple question that needs to be addressed. In the same move that was made to take the threshold to 85,000, as inadequate as it is, could not the People's Progressive Party also have lifted the minimum wage to the same $85,000?
Well, yes, but even that would have been inadequate.
It would still be inadequate.
Yeah, but that is what
a
should have
sensible
done.
thing to be done.
Look, the government seems bent on punitive taxes on workers. They seem, while I have no problem with promoting business and ensuring business succeed because businesses are critical, I have a problem when you're doing it at the expense of the working people who are really the poor people in this society.
And who are carrying the country.
And carrying the burden of income tax in this country. And so that is where that is my concern, that enough is not being done to put more resources in the hands of the people and at the same time control cost of living so that whatever increases you give do not eat up. Well, it's not by cost of living.
Here's a $782 billion budget. Set aside from that is $5 billion to mitigate cost of living impact. Absolutely inadequate. Absolutely inadequate. And you are talking about a budget which has grown, as you have pointed out, by 41% over last year's budget. The cost of living shock is harsher now than it was last year. But you have not taken the time to grow the resources that you are providing to mitigate the circumstances occasioned by the cost of living situation in Guyana. But at the same time, even though you set aside this $5 billion, you do not have a plan. You do not have a set of programs that will see you in a very structured manner as a government, putting resources to work for the people to improve the quality of life that ordinary working class Guyanese enjoy at the moment, if enjoy could be used sufficiently in this case. What kind of thinking do you believe went into this kind of planning, if at all it's planning? Because it's clearly a slush fund from which people will dip their hands.
Corruption.
And
The reality is, if you want to be accountable and people could question what you're doing, then they would have put out in clear terms what this money is being allocated for. When you leave it as a block sum, you now give yourself the opportunity to put it wherever you want, however you want, whenever you want. And what that does is reduce the level of scrutiny. It reduces the level of transparency. And therefore, again, we see another, when you look at how they approach everything, you see the avenues that are created for corruption. I mentioned the infrastructure, but here is a classic case of you allocating money, but not developing the procedures, not identifying where this money will go, to whom it will go. And therefore, you leave it as a block sum that you could do what you like with. And there wouldn't be scrutiny. And I think the hallmark of this budget is the further removal of scope for scrutiny and the creation of conditions for increased corruption.
Here's an allocation of $5 billion without a plan, without a program that is set aside, this money set aside for cost of living. Here's Gaisuco, an ailing industry which has failed to meet targets over the last 2 to 3 years, even though targets have been readjusted downwards, which is not contributing to the national economy in terms of revenue or foreign exchange as it did in the past. Getting a further $4 billion. One industry gets $4 billion and an entire nation of workers has $5 billion set aside for them. How do you?
First of all, if you listen to the speech of the minister with responsibility for finance in the Ministry of the Office of the President, you will recognize that he's a very dishonest man. He proceeded to say, to operate as if the sugar industry was destroyed by the coalition. Began closing under the PPP. The European Union gave them millions of dollars from the time this process was announced, that there will be the removal of the quota, etc. Millions of dollars were allocated to Guyana. This money was misused, mismanaged by the PPP. We know of the Skeldon White Elephant. Now, what the government seeks to do is to now try and suggest that this industry was destroyed by the coalition. By the time the coalition came to power, the industry was already destroyed. Many factories were closed by the PPP. What the APNU AFC sought to do was to seek to right-size it so that it can become viable on a smaller scale. The government now comes back to power without a plan. And all they keep doing is blaming the previous government. Now, the 7,000 workers that they talk about, when the European Union gave money, that money should have gone to creating employment for those persons
And preparing them for it.
and preparing them for changes, for the new jobs, etc. What the PPP did is squandered the money in two ways: on projects that were not viable. One of the hallmarks of the PPP is they like projects without proper feasibility, and therefore they are likely to fail. So now they come to play politics with the industry. We're going to give you this $4 billion. And when you look at the production targets they set, they're falling every year below it. So there is no indication that the industry is likely to take off. In fact, many people in the industry is calling for the removal of the present leadership of the industry. But the PPP, politically, they see it as being in their interest and revitalizing sugar, when they know full well that they're throwing that money down a black hole. Because in the final analysis, there are production, much less productivity. And come next year, they will come again for more money without a plan for the recovery.
Later on in the year, more like.
But yet, yes. So the PPP is wasting taxpayers' money. And that is the bottom line. There is no proper approach to the governance of this society.
Let's touch a bit on these infrastructure projects. Gas to shore, gas to energy. Here's the background. This project was being touted to be the savior of Guyana in terms of energy costs and so on. It started out at somewhere in the region of $700 million. Then it grew to $900 million US. It stands now, having shifted location, at somewhere in the region of $2.1 billion US. There's no feasibility study. There is no impact assessment, environmental impact assessment. There's no consideration for where that pipeline is going to pass, what effects it's likely to have on persons, their lives and livelihood, and so on. Now, in your initial reaction to Budget 2023, you spoke about there not being provision in the budget that would immediately impact in a positive way, particularly the manufacturing sector. Within an hour, the PPP came on a program saying that the gas to energy project is the project that is directed to alleviating the difficulties of the manufacturing sector. How reasonable it is, or how reasonable is it to have a corrupt project form the basis of saving an authentic industry?
One of the things should be obvious to the PPP is that everything Jack Deo attempt to manage has failed. Be it Skeldon and more packaging, fiber optic cable, you name it. The bridge, in some regard, the Marara Bridge, which is the Burbage Bridge, which is considered to be one of his better projects.
A parasite, really.
It's really a parasite, and what that program does is put money in the hands of the people who invest at the expense of the people. But let me tell you why you have to take the gas to energy project with a pinch of salt. You need a low cost of electricity. Until now, Jack Deo nor the PPP have said what will be the cost of electricity at the end of this project. How do you then argue that this project is going to bring down the cost of electricity when you as a government, you have not said well, electricity will cost a penny or 10 cents or $1. On what basis have you decided that it's going to bring it down? If they are serious about bringing it down, let us do the calculation. Let them do the calculation and say to us, the power will arrive at the consumer at this price. And this price will allow for effective and efficient production in manufacturing. They have not done that. And they can't do that because the figures they were given when it was 900 million. Obviously, it will go up if it is now 2.1 billion. And if it is going up, it is likely to be insignificant if it reduces the cost of electricity at all. So when you add to it this fact that no one seems to know at what cost this electricity will be delivered, it is hogwash for the PPP to come and tell us that this project will bring down the cost of electricity. They put out no figures to suggest that. This is just what I call political pandering.
No, natural gas is a finite resource. No one has said to this nation anything about the time, the duration during which this country will benefit from available natural with respect to the life of the project in that regard. And there is no word as to how do we transition at the end of natural gas to a form of energy that is viable and reliable. So this all seems to be a created opportunity for the expenditure of money that will go someplace else.
And it is consistent with what happened with Skeldon, where you weren't giving proper bring down the cost of energy so that manufacturing will do well. People forget that. Skeldon was going to bring on the street a power generating element, and that power was supposed to help bring down the cost.
And it was supposed to use bagasse.
Correct. And nothing of the sort.
Bioenergy.
So you're seeing the same approach. What is most ridiculous about this is not just solely the fact that they don't know how long it will last for. They're not stating it. Sometimes they know. But when you want to make money, certain figures you don't give. What is evident is that there is an absence of an energy policy. Which communities are suitable for wind power so that you can use wind, and at what cost wind will be delivered? Which communities are suitable for solar? Which communities you will maintain?
And hydro.
No, on actual fuel and what is your approach to the development of our hydropower potential? There is no plan because there's the absence of an energy policy. What Guyana needs is a proper survey of the society to be clear in our plans as to where are the best places for us to put wind energy, where are the best places to put solar, where are the best places to put hydro, and to be able to access the power at a low cost. You're not seeing that kind of analysis from the government. The government lacks a comprehensive plan and they lack vision.
And just to let our viewers know that indeed Skeldon was touted as being the facility that would have not only brought down the cost of electricity, but end blackouts.
Oh, yes.
And it was going to produce bioenergy using bagasse from the sugarcane plant and so on. Now, the only thing that I ever generated was a lot of heat when the bagasse caught fire in its warehouse. But I can say without any fear of contradiction that Skeldon is a single kilowatt of bioenergy. In fact, Skeldon had bought some generating sets that was using bunker C fuel. Skeldon, Gaisuko Skeldon sold those generating sets to the Guyana Power and Light, but kept them on the premises. Now, those generating sets were also supposed to contribute the excess to the national grid. Instead, they sold it to GPL, which didn't have a place to put it, and they kept them at Skeldon and operated them from there.
It's just,
what kind of
it's a
nonsense is that?
manifestation of the incompetence. And when one looks at how the government approaches things, one will see, like I've said, the absence of a vision first, the absence of a plan, and that is compounded by incompetence. And I dare say the gas to energy project, I think it's going to be worse because it has significant environmental impact on the communities in which it will pass. And so, in some regard, we cannot take it as light as people took Skeldon. Skeldon going to end up being a white telephone with no gas pipe passing through any community with a likelihood of disaster. There's a clear case or a clear possibility that with the gas to energy project, there can be environmental, well, there can be explosions among others, and it will have negative impact on the community. Also, when you shift in communities in the way they are doing it, they are going to affect agricultural production because there's no structured approach. One of the things I worry about is the absence of a proper land use policy. You see, if a country doesn't have a proper land use policy, you end up taking any land
To do anything.
to do anything. For instance, and I will make this point in my budget speech, we continue to build on the coast while talking about climate change. And if you see what they're doing, this government, every road that they are doing now, they are decreasing the size of the drain.
And the width of the road, I might add.
And well, I could live with the width of the road. People could drive on the little edges and so. But when you decrease climate change, the government itself is encouraging flooding because there will be no place for the water to go. You just have to come through Prashad Nagar right now, where they are narrowing the drains with possibly deadly consequences. And if you do not have a proper structure of drainage, then flooding will be a problem. And I predict that this government's approach is going to result in increased flooding when there should be a structured approach to looking at our drainage system and developing a system that allows us to drain
And store.
water. When you take all those houses you are putting behind South Rambell going all down there, those are places that stored water.
Those were marshlands.
Now, water don't take political bribe. When water come in, if you occupy the place we're supposed to rest, it's going to go into communities. And like I said, I predict this government is going to increase the flooding in this country because of the absence of a plan.
As they have increased the budget deficit.
Oh yeah.
Now, in 2019, Mr. Norton, our budget deficit stood at $29.9 billion. By 2021, that grew to $114.8 billion. Last year, it was at $155.5 billion. In 2023, it is projected to grow. That deficit is projected to increase to $167.7 billion. how does this impact the ordinary citizen, the burden that each of us must carry, even in the face of oil revenues?
I think we need to go back to basic business principles. If you have money and you want to build a house, and you have the money to build a house, you will then look to see what are the options. Do I use my money to build a house? And if you decide you're not using it, it's because the deal you will get from the bank would be a much better deal. And therefore, you can invest the money that you have. If you follow me.
Yes.
Now, as I understand it, when there are good terms, and therefore it is not in your best interest to use what you have, that is not the case. We have $2 billion in the Natural Resource Fund. And we seem bent on borrowing, which will put pressure on present generation, because present generation has to pay. Even if you get a 3 years moratorium or a 4 years, this generation will pay. But it would also be terrible for future generations because of the interest you're paying. I think the government, again, is not showing a vision and an understanding of how you use your finances. I don't think you need to go to university to know if you have money at your disposal. It is better to use it if your borrowing option will create burdens for you down the line. And this is just what the government is doing. They're just borrowing with no proper analysis of whether it is better to use the Natural Resource Fund or to borrow. I believe we have to develop an approach which says the debt ratio, we must keep reducing it. You cannot continue to borrow and then you have to pay. And you're paying at higher rates, you're going to increase the indebtedness of the country. And over the longer term. And so I think the absence of prudent use of the Natural Resource Fund, again, will generate problems for us. And the government is showing no intention of prudently using the resources in the Natural Resource Fund.
But here's another problem. Here's another problem. The focus seems to be shifting almost exclusively towards what Guyana will do with oil revenues. And merchandise exports not associated with oil has been neglected to the extent that it comes steadily down. Now, non-oil merchandise, and this is only export numbers, in 2019 again, stood at $1.567 billion US. This is when Guyana had
no oil.
No oil. By 2020, when we started the oil operation, that non-oil merchandise export dropped to $1.52 billion. And it continued its downward trend in 2021 to $1.3 billion US. 2022, slightly up $1.4 billion US. And the government is now projecting that it will have a massive shift upwards. It will increase to $1.6 billion in 2023, which is exactly where it was in 2019.
Well, first of all, I don't know how they arrive at their figures. What I know, the non-oil sector generally,
it's collapsing
and not getting the resources it needs to get to be able to progress. While the government is saying they're fighting Dutch disease, everything the government doing is inviting Dutch disease. This budget does not show, like I said before, measures to help manufacturing to improve. This budget does not show, measures to cause the agricultural sector to increase. And if your non-oil sector, if there are no measures and structured programs to ensure your non-oil sector increases, then you're inviting the Dutch disease. And I believe that the government put a lot of the resources into infrastructure so as to be able to be involved in corruption. Like I said before, I believe there's need for infrastructure. But infrastructural development must be planned, organized, and it must link to economic development. There are a number of areas that we can target to develop agriculture, agro-processing, and then into manufacturing in the general sense. You're not seeing that approach. The government speaks about the coconut industry, but there is no structured plan to ensure, first of all, you increase the acreage of coconut. Secondly, you prepare the basis for processing oil, coconut oil, and to export. You see no evidence of anything like that. Even our agricultural products, you are not seeing an approach which is indicative of the fact that we can move in a heavy direction towards agro-processing. And therefore, your agro-processing will either stagnate or retrogress. What that means is the non-oil sector will be in trouble. Now, a lot of the developments you see, for instance, the construction, etc., they themselves are linked to the oil industry. And therefore, again, a collapse in the oil sector for any reason will have a devastating effect on the entire Ghana economy. Because while the government talks diversification, there is no evidence that there is going to be diversification.
They're living for this generation only.
Well, I don't even know if it is for this generation, because I think a lot of the problems will emerge during this generation. When you do what you're doing, the floods will affect this generation. When you're doing what you're doing, take education. One would have thought, well, first of all, I must point out to you that with this oil budget, 41%, the allocation to education has declined.
Yes.
I said in the press conference the other day, the President Ali promised an increase to 20%. I think it has dropped to 12%.
12, somewhere in the region of 12.
Now, what does that mean? It means our system will produce lower quality human resource. What should have happened is that there should have been an increase in education with the aim of lifting the education standard in all communities. Until we arrive at a point where a child from the Rupununi doesn't have to come to Tonto Queen's College to get Queen's College level education, we will have these disparities. And we should have been using these oil resources to lift the level of education in all our communities. But you know what is worse? When you hear the finance minister, oh, we will train so many teachers in this period. I talk about the health minister in parliament, we'll train so many, I think they call them medical assistants or health assistants, whatever they call them. Now, you know what that fails to take into consideration? If you train 3,000 teachers now, for probably the next 5 to 7 years, they will be apprentices in the school system. And they miss that when you lose experienced teachers, you are losing the very human resource that is going to make you successful. This government, since I know it from the previous time in government, always celebrating the number of teachers, the number of nurses. Yeah, well, that's one by itself. The number of nurses they train, they never ever pay attention to the fact, apart from the fact that the qualified ones and the experienced ones are going away, they pay no attention to the fact of doing things to keep those teachers and keep those nurses. For instance, I do not believe we should continue to allow our qualified teachers to retire at 55. Because you are allowing your experience to go. And experience play an important role in not only increasing production, but productivity as well. You could bring in a nurse that you trained yesterday and say, oh, the hospitals are filled with nurses. Do they have the requisite level of competence? And so the focus is not on improvement of quality. It is advertising quantity. What causes the development is the qualitative development of your human resource. And so this government, in my mind, is a jokey government that just focuses on numbers, and the things that they're doing are not impacting the quality of life of the people. And similarly in health, the focus should be on improving the efficiency, the effectiveness, improving the human resource. You could put, if you tell me I put $40 billion in the health sector, and when I arrive at the Georgetown Hospital, nurse gaffing, doctor they're on the phone, and service isn't being delivered, then you do not help the development process. And I believe that we have to now focus on training, yes, but retaining the persons you have with experience, and for the training, those that you would have retained, as well as adapting the system to the technological developments that are occurring in the world. So to me, it's like specialty hospitals. Everything is specialty. You have to have the fundamentals, the basics. Listen, when you do a first degree, you study a village, a country. You get a broad knowledge of the country. When you do your master's, you study a village in the country. And then when you do your doctorate, you probably know a street thoroughly. But the fundamentals must be there. And this system is not putting the fundamentals in place. And if you talk about specialty hospitals, there are certain standards that go with it. That if you don't have your basic primary health care in order, you're not going to arrive at a level where you can manage specialty hospitals, etc. So it sounds good. But I think the coalition view has always been that you need to sort out the health system, ensure that you have a proper primary health care system, and then you could move on to the specialties, etc. Mind you, sometimes I think these analyses don't take into consideration geography. Of what use will be a child specialty hospital in Georgetown or on the West Coast, or a child in the Northwest or in the Rupununi? But if you have a proper hospital in those areas with the requisite specialists and medical people, then that will impact. So I think the whole planning process is upside down.
a proper nutrition in the home and in the school and in the formative years will allow you to perhaps have a healthier nation and one that requires less of the specialty hospital treatment. Recently, the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, released a report that says that around 5% of Guyana's population, and that 5% they worked out at, I believe, 40,000 of our population, is undernourished. And a further 43% of our population cannot afford a healthy diet. Should we not be paying closer attention in a mega budget such as this to nutrition at the level of our children pre and in school, as opposed to going to highfalutin hospital facilities in the immediate?
Well, the Ministry of Health here until now has not outlined a policy of preventative medicine. They're still in the mode of somebody gets sick, you come and you treat them. But first of all, I think there's need for a health education program in Guyana, where you put resources into educating people on what they need in terms of nutrition, etc. And then you need to take the measures to allow them to access nutritious, to the extent that you're not dealing with the cost of living. You are, by that very token,
not dealing with nutrition.
Nutrition and depriving people of a healthy diet. And so these things are interconnected.
Oh, Mr. Norton, I'm sorry to interrupt your train of thought. Here's a report that says half of Guyana's population cannot afford a nutritious diet. Here's a case where half of Guyana's population is represented by a political organization. And that half of the population is treated as though it doesn't exist. Its representatives don't exist. It is the callousness of the administration here.
Like I've said before, this budget has no anti-poverty measures. Nutrition will be part of your anti-poverty measures. There is no attempt to first of all identify the pockets or the large poverty, and then come up with programs, including nutrition, to deal with poverty. I'll give you an example. If you go to Plastic City over the river, you see the conditions, and I choose there because both ethnic groups exist there.
You know that I'm the person who blew the lid on Plastic City in 2007. We were in Parliament together.
Yeah, but you know that Plastic City exists. The conditions are terrible. Yet there is no anti-poverty program to first identify this area and then come up with clear proposals as to how to improve the lives of these people, even if it demands relocation, so that these people's lives can be improved. The government operates as if Plastic City doesn't exist. Angoy Avenue in New Amsterdam doesn't exist.
But you know that there's abject poverty when you have settlements known as Plastic City, Skull City, and Shit and Shy.
Yeah.
I mean,
but look, I went into Bushlot and I saw poverty, real poverty. And this is a PPP stronghold. Of course, there's the wealthy in Bushlot who can make it on their own. but there is no structured program to target that section of bush lot to ensure that it is taken out of poverty. And like I said in my initial comments in the budget, that this government treats poverty as if it doesn't exist. And it takes a large amount of resources to put into infrastructure. And mind you, because it's a Ponzi scheme, many of the roads have got to be redone shortly.
And will have to be
If
redone
you
again
drive,
after
if you
redone.
drive on the new road from Mocha to Diamond, you will see holes already developing, which means just now you got to reallocate resources to do that. And so I also need to focus on quality, the delivery of quality infrastructure. Because when you don't deliver quality infrastructure, you are pushing people more in poverty, because you will have to use those resources to redo projects that you would have already done.
In the remaining 3 minutes, Mr. Norton, I want to ask for a response from you on this matter. Half of the population is in abject poverty, can't afford nutrition, but it is on the back, it is on the backs of those same persons that this government is seeking to borrow $134 billion from the United States for the gas to energy project. It is the poor, impoverished that must fetch this burden of irresponsible borrowing. Your comment?
Well, like I said from the inception, they have no proper policy on borrowing. They just look like they borrow for the sake of borrowing to create slush funds that they can make money on. The consequence of that is that the people will pay. Jagdeo and company going to be long gone when the people are burdened with this debt. I believe the government needs to develop a rational, sensible policy on borrowing and find a mechanism to, in the interest of the people of Guyana, only borrow when it is absolutely necessary and use the resources we have to develop. But you saw where they were going. Very early, Jagdeo suggested that the country enrich. The minister with responsibility for finance indicated the country enrich. Okay, we aren't rich, but there are more resources now for us to do development in a structured way and to ensure that our people benefit. I think what is happening is going to push people more and more into poverty, because there is no attempt to ensure we utilize the resources we have in a very prudent fashion. And that is worrying.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aubrey Norton, MP, leader of the People's National Congress, leader of the opposition. Viewers, listeners, I want to thank you very much for staying with us these last 55 minutes or so. And I invite you to join us again next Sunday for another edition of Nation Watch. Mr. Norton, thank you very much
Thanks for having me.
for joining me. Yes, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Stay blessed until we meet again.
People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, presents Nation Watch.